Hello, welcome back. Today we're going to be having an interesting little discussion. It's mainly a tutorial, kind of going back to some of the previous tutorials we had on Google Forms and actually using AppScript to go with Google Forms. Today's deal is called, what do they call it? Oh, yeah, Death by Google. The reason I called it that is because I've recently had an experience where I think I might have lost a client. It's not totally 100%, but it's very possible. And the reason is pretty simple. Um, as much as I hate to say it, this was caused by Google. So if anybody at Google is listening, it's your fault. Um, Google AppScript is a phenomenal tool for automating things and making multiple Google programs kind of glue them together to be able to perform a lot of different tasks in a much more automated, much simpler, more productive way. Unfortunately, they had some problems with their triggers. And for those who don't know, what happens is when you have a form and you fill it out from a user standpoint, that's basically all you do. You just put in information, you click submit, you're done. As we discussed before, on the back end, what's happening is the information is actually stored in a Google spreadsheet, and that's where it keeps all this data. So there is a way to set it up to go back and edit it. There is a way to put additional information. Think of it as a database storage for the information. And so for people who try to get a little bit more functionality out of Google Forms, the convenient thing about using something like AppScript is it allows you to extend the capabilities of what regular Google Form submission can do, such as, for example, you can write a little program to email somebody with all the details of the information. Because by default, Google, you can set up notification right from within the form or spreadsheet itself, where you will get an email saying somebody just changed the spreadsheet or somebody just made changes. But it doesn't actually, it points to a specific record, but it doesn't actually give you a nice formatted display of all the fields and what they mean, or if you want to do some additional maybe comparisons and actually deviate based on information what you want the email to say. But to make it really nice, you really need to use AppScript. And the nice thing about how they set it up is that you're able to not only use notifications, but you're also able to use what they call triggers. And one of the triggers is when the form is submitted. And so what you can do is you can write some code in AppScript, in this particular case, using that as an example to send an email out to somebody formatted in a special way. And then you're simply telling Google to execute this particular piece of code whenever somebody hits the submit button in the form. So that way, it triggers this action only when a submission is made. So it's very convenient. That's what you want to do. The problem is that in the last, I don't know, it's been, I think, a couple of weeks, 3 weeks maybe, they've had some issues. First, they thought it was my code, which is the normal reaction typically for most programmers. But it turns out that I wasn't the only one, which of course then points out that it's not just my code, it's somebody else that's at fault here. And in this case, Google provided the service, so it's them, where the triggering mechanism was not firing when it was supposed to. So people would click submit, the information does get stored in the spreadsheet without any problem, so you don't lose the data. But the code that executes optionally as part of it, as part of this trigger, was not executed every time. And so because the client I had was waiting for these emails to show up because it was part of their workflow of what's going on, unfortunately, they were not getting the emails every time. So they wound up missing some of the orders. And this is kind of a mission critical application I did for them. And so they, naturally got mad. And obviously, getting mad at Google for them is they don't really care. They just want it to work. And so they got mad at me, and potentially, without getting into all set details about the interaction, which was done in a hangout, so we couldn't actually hit each other. But, I've put quite a bit of work into it to make it work, obviously. And now they're trying to back up, saying that, if you can't get the thing fixed, then we're basically going to go back to the way we used to do it manually. And so, but the story basically being on the table here, the bottom line is that yes, Google screwed up with their fixing their triggers. That's still not fixed. And the client wound up missing some deals, which of course winds up being a problem for their customers. And in the end, I'm the one who gets shot and potentially gets fired in this particular case. But what it prompted me to do as part of this experience is to think, okay, there's plenty of times where you need to be able to do something, but there's various ways how it can be done. And so using Google's trigger at this point is not an option. I'm sure they're working on it. I'm sure they'll fix it at some point. So I don't have any doubt about that. As to exactly when, I have no idea. Perhaps somebody in Google, if they see this hangout here, can put something in comments about when they think it's going to be fixed. Maybe they don't even know themselves exactly when that's going to happen. So until it happens, I was thinking, there's got to be a way, because it's a very important part of functionality. You need to be able to do something with information when it gets entered. And so I started thinking about, is there anything I can do to prevent problems with this approach and still be able to have the functionality I need, meaning when somebody submits a form, then something happens, or at least not necessarily at that particular moment, but at least at some point in time, so the whole flow of business process can happen. And so my solution to the problem so far was, which is of course just one solution, like I said in my comments about this post, you can have many solutions usually to the problems. And my solution was to write, it still would be an app script code that would go through and look at all the content of the spreadsheet, and then it would have some place in a spreadsheet where it would actually, the process itself would update to indicate I've already been here, and that way it's just going to simply bypass it since it's already been there. But if it hits something that it hasn't touched yet, in other words, that particular flag, if you will, in the spreadsheet is not turned on, that would mean that that's new information, and then it would generate an email and send it. So essentially the emailing part in AppScript and everything is working fine. It's just the triggering that doesn't happen. So I thought if I have this process in place, then I could be running it. We'll talk in a few minutes after I show you what I did in terms of how to make it run all the time. But in the meantime, this process will take care of the problem where the triggering isn't happening. But if I run this process of mine often enough, then the idea would be that it would essentially do the same thing the trigger does and would send the email properly, and then people don't lose any of their orders, and of course everybody's happy, and hopefully the client will see the light and not fire me for this if they see the solution. But if they do, then at least they can use the same solution for other people. So without further ado, let's go ahead and look at the code. So you'll need to, this is a little bit more advanced than beginner, but it's not too bad. I tried to keep it as simple as possible. And I'm going to pull up the form here shortly with this cute name, Death by Google. Okay, so hopefully by now you see it. You can see it's a simple form. I just put a couple of fields on it, and just to show you as an example. And so the idea is that people enter the information to the form. So I'll put in something like we'll call it, since we're talking about death and stuff, by killing, we'll say test bullet 1 as an example, and I just submit this. Okay, and then if I look at the actual spreadsheet, which is right here, as you can see, I did some testing before, and as you can see, I have this column here. I'm going to make the screen a little bigger. Last time I did it, Zara Altair indicated that it's too small. She threatened not to watch my videos anymore unless it's bigger. Just kidding. Thank you, Zara. Excellent point. And as you can see here, I have a couple of records here, and this column I, in this particular case, not any particular reason why it's I just wanted kind of away a little bit from the rest of the data. I'm actually setting it up to use the word updated, which of course could be anything, but in my case, I'm saying updated to indicate things that I already reported on, already emailed on. Okay, so as you can see, our new record we just added now, that says test bullet 1, the column I here has nothing. So if we actually then look at the script, and so I'll show you the script real quick here somewhere. Where is the script? Just quickly pull up the script here. Okay, and here's the script. I'll make it that a little bit bigger too. You can see. So the script, as you can see, is, if you get rid of all the blank lines and get rid of, not count the lines that have, brackets, which you have to have, by the way. You don't have to have blank lines, but you have to have brackets the way I have them. And then you can see it's, roughly around 20 lines long. I mean, it's not that big to do everything we want to do. And we'll step through it one line at a time in a minute. I just want to run it so you can see exactly what's happening. So I'm going to go ahead and execute it by clicking on the run button here. And it says running the function. And it'll give me an error if there was an error. If there isn't, it's going to go away like it does now, meaning it's done. So at this point, if I go back to my email real quick, I can see that I have a new message from me. And you can see that the new message, make it a little bit bigger here. It says manual trigger pulled. Yeah, my idea of joke. Which is the subject. And it says here are new entries, and it says test bullet 1, which is the information. As you can see, it immediately did exactly what I wanted to do. In other words, we put in an entry, the code gets run, and I get an email. Okay? So that's the basic process. If I go ahead and run this script again, by just clicking run, it's not going to hurt anything. It's just going to go ahead and run it. And once it runs it, then if I go back to my email, so let's go back to email for a second, and you will see that basically there's only one email like this. It's the same one, test bullet 1. In other words, no new emails came because we haven't put any new information. So to finish testing it before we go into actual code, if I go back to the submit another response on the form, then you will see that right here, we'll put in test, we'll put in like bullet 2, and click submit, and let's put a couple of records. So let's put in another one, and we'll call it, this will be an anti-ink number 3. It doesn't really matter because I'm just putting some data just to put a couple of records in there. So now that I've gone and entered these records, as you can see, if I go back to my email, you will notice that there's nothing new there because the code we're not running the code, so it still showed that test bullet 1. And if I check my email, you will see that there's nothing new. And it's the same old. And the reason being is because we haven't run the code. So now I'm going to go ahead and jump back into the script, back to this point. And in the script here, we're not changing anything. We're just running it exactly as is. I'm going to go ahead and click the run button again and let it execute. So it's running the function and takes a couple of seconds to run. It's all done. And so now if I go back to my email, if it worked right, then as you can see now we have 2 new emails right there, and in the order that they were entered. So there is the test bullet 2 that came in, same subject and everything else, and then there is this one that says anti-tank number 3. So as you can see, it executes exactly how we want it to execute. In other words, when entries are put in, the code runs, and then emails are generated. So that way, I don't need to rely on Google's triggering mechanism to tell me, or to basically not tell me, but to be able to fire off this email. My process, my manual triggering, if you will, accomplishes the same job without, even though Google is having these problems right now, until they get it fixed. Once they do get it fixed and it works solid, then that will be the way to do it. So you don't have to write this other process. But this piece of code, what I wrote, the way I came up to as a solution to get around the problem, it can give you some hints as to how you can use it in your own code to do some additional things. And And so let's go over it right now so you can use it in some other code as well. So I'm just going to go line by line, explain exactly what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. So with every piece of code you write for AppScript, you always have what they call functions. So you always have, like, as a minimum, you have this one thing called function, and they put in my function. You can call it anything you want. In my case, I just left it alone because it doesn't really matter. But if you have multiple functions, you can call them, they need to be different names, and they can have as much or as little code as you wish. So the first couple of lines here, I'm basically setting up the variables that I need to them to be able to refer to different parts of the current active spreadsheet. So this var sheet becomes the variable that's being used to point to okay, Zara just said that let me try this again. Let's try to show the screen share. The screen share isn't showing, she said. Let's try that. Okay. So thank you, Zara. In real time here, we got the code back. So hopefully everybody can see it now. So the first line basically says point to the current, whatever the current active sheet is, active spreadsheet, which of course is the one where we have the information. That's where this code is. So we're referencing it that way, using the spreadsheet app, they call it. And then the second one points to the very first sheet, which is this get sheets of 0, is essentially saying point to the very first sheet in the current spreadsheet. So those are the two variables. You just need to copy the code exactly as I have it, and it'll work fine. You don't really need to get into details of that, but that's essentially what it means. And then what we're saying is we're going to actually get all of our data from the spreadsheet into a variable called data, and you you get the information by using this get values method, as they call it. And the get range without specifying range means everything. So essentially we're saying, in English description of this line would be, get me all the data that you have on the spreadsheet into a variable called data. Okay? And the variable called data is an array, meaning it's a variable that can have multiple values, because we have a spreadsheet with multiple values everywhere. That's why rows and columns and all the cells. So that's why it ends up being an array that stores all this information in it. And then over here we make a loop, this for loop. As you can see between the brackets, I highlight this one green and this one here. That's a loop where we're going through and we're going to be doing things. And what we're doing is we're saying the loop is going to be from 1 until the length of data, meaning the entire spreadsheet. And we're going to just continuing to go one by one. And this variable I that's actually going to be used as the looping variable, or each iteration of this loop means it's going to be changing. So it's going to start with 1, and then it's going to check to see if it's less than whatever the length is, meaning how many rows that particular spreadsheet has. So if it's less, then it's going to go then increment it to 2, 3. So every iteration of this code here within this area here, this loop, is going to be changing this variable I, which actually in this case refers to the row we're dealing with in the spreadsheet. And we're saying, first thing I'm saying here is I'm going to break the information from this really cryptic way of looking at it into something I actually read. In my case, I'm just calling them field 1, field 2. In your case, you might want to call it something. If it's a name, call it a name. If it's a customer number, call it customer number. Something that's much more readable in English, so it's easy for you to write code. So in my case, I have these two fields. So I'm calling FLD1, short for field 1. And then to refer to it, and that's how you refer to every piece of data on your spreadsheet, is you're using the data variable, which is this variable that has all the information from the spreadsheet. And then you have to give it, in the square brackets, 2 parameters. You have to give it the row and you have to give it the column. Okay? So in my case here, first time around, it's going to be row number 1 and it's going to be column number 1. And that's what's going to be in field 1 variable. And then we do the same thing with row number 1, column number 2, goes into field 2 variable. And then row number 1, column number 8 goes into a variable called FLD9. If you're wondering why this is 8, why this is 9, I'll explain in a second here. It doesn't have to be. Like I said, you can call variables whatever you want. So let's look the main thing is they're just 1, 2, and 8. Let's look at our spreadsheet where the actual data is. And let's look what this means by saying row number 1 is the first row. Everything you do in when you refer to the spreadsheet, for example, you start always with 0. You do not start with 1. You start with 0. In my case, I'm starting loop with 1 as the row number 1. Why? Because the row number 0 right here contains nothing but headings, and I don't need to do anything with headings. These are just field names. So that's why I'm starting with row using number 1, because 1 is actually referring to the first data row, not 0, but 1. Okay, so that's the reason why I started the loop with 1. And then each column also starts with 0. That second reference in the second square bracket is the column reference. So we're starting with row 1, and then column 1, I said, is field 1, column 2 is field 2. The reason we start with 1 and 2 here is because there is column called timestamp, which is something automatically Google Forms generates. You don't have to do anything about it. It just does it to show you when this entry was made. It's got the date and the time of the entry, and that's element number 0. That's why we don't really do anything with it, so we don't care about it. So we're actually starting with row number 1, column number 1, happens to be this particular cell here, okay, which is B2. And then row number 1 in AppScript, column number 2, happens to be C2, which is this one right here. So if it's a little bit confusing, just listen to this point a couple of times and you'll see it's not that difficult to figure out. It just looks a little confusing, but if you really think about it, you can see it's not difficult at all. So typically you would start with the second row, you would start with the second column, and that's how you get all your data. And then depending whichever one you're trying to get, you just simply reference it using AppScript, using the data field, and then using the row and column to indicate what's what. So we have column 1 is field 1, column 2 is field 2, and we're going in this loop 1 row at a time. So we start with row number 1, next time around will be row number 2, row number 3, and so on and so forth. Number 8 here, the number 8, let's go back to the spreadsheet again. And if we look at number 8, then we go and we start with, remember this is 0, so this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And so as you can see, number 8 starting at 0 winds up being column I, which is exactly where the status is, if you will, or this flag. In my case, what I'm doing is as soon as I find something new, I do the email. Well, I mean, that's one thing we do. And also we want to change the value of this particular cell, whatever it happens to be, whichever row we're on, to indicate it's updated, meaning we're done. So next time we won't have to do, we won't duplicate the emails, in other words. We only want to do the email one time. And that's why we're using that particular column as a reference or as a flag to tell us if we already went through this process before or not. And so the first time you go through, the value of that particular variable will be undefined, what they call it, which is this status variable. And so since it's undefined, Zara says we lost the image again. What is with? I guess we have to keep jumping back. Try it one more time. Okay. All right, thank you, Zara. One more time. So looking at the code here, back at the actual script, AppScript script, you can see that we're populating the variables. So we got all the status here, and then we also have the both fields, data fields. And then next thing I'm doing, I'm saying if type of field 9, which is this status variable basically used, equals undefined, which if there's nothing there, it'll show up as undefined, or these little two vertical bars means that it's like saying or in English. This field 9 equals to nothing, so I'm just checking for two possibilities. Then I wanted to execute the code between these brackets. If you put the, you can see between this bracket and this bracket. So it's going to execute this code if this comes out as undefined. And it will be undefined when it has no data in it. It will show up as undefined. So that's what we're saying. We're saying if there's no the word updated in there, That's another way to explain it. Then we want to execute this code. And so what do we do in this code? In this code, we're saying, look at the SS, which is the current, first sheet basically, and grab a range for whatever row plus 1. You just need to use this as an offset. Like I said, just duplicate the code, it'll work. And you're looking at, in this particular case, you need to reference. It's weird because I told you everything starting with 0. In this case, you wind up actually starting with 1 when you use the get range thing. And so I'm actually referencing this offset of whatever the current row is plus 1, and then using 9, that's why I call it field 9, as the status. So that's essentially what I'm saying here is get the range for where the status information is, and then in that cell, set the value to be the word updated. That's why you see the word updated in that thing. So you can use this approach, just keeping in mind that you need to specify the row and column starting with number 1, not with 0, when you use this command, set range. And you point to the current spreadsheet, you use the get range, give it the row and column number you want, and then you put in a dot set value, and then whatever you put as the value in here, which could be a variable, by the way, in which case you don't need to use parentheses, but if you want a certain word or whatever piece of text you want in there, you simply do it, and that's what's going to populate that particular column, that particular row, that particular cell. So the moral of the story here is that by using this approach, you can basically populate Google spreadsheets any way you want, anywhere you want, however you want, by just using this one command, which shows you how to do it in this particular cell. You can obviously change row and column to be any cell, and you can put this within loops, just like I have, that do all kinds of population of information. So just keep that in mind. Very powerful that you can just populate spreadsheet with a command, with a single command like this. You can do all kinds of things based on that. So that's what we're doing. We're saying if currently this field 9, which is status, has nothing in it, then we want to go ahead and put the word updated in it, number 1. And number 2, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and email the information. So as you can see, I put in this field called variable called recipient, and I just put my email in there. And I put subject to be manual trigger pulled, as you saw in my emails. And then the body, I'm putting in, just saying here are new entries. And then I'm adding, meaning it's just going to show up by appending the information to this line. They'll say here are new entries, colon space, and then the value of field 1, and then space, and then the value of field 2. So I'm putting all of this information to a single line, and then using the Gmail app, which is one of the classes, as they call them, services that Google has to send an email. With a single line, email actually goes out using whatever the recipient is, whatever the subject I specify, and whatever the body is right there. So that way it winds up having all the information it needs, and it sends email out. So again, to quickly recap, we simply point to the existing spreadsheet, we get the information from it. If the status field is undefined or it's blank, then we go ahead and change it to be the word with the word updated. So next time around, it's not going to be blank. So it will only do this once. And then we go ahead and send out the email. Now, if the status is not undefined, it'll drop to the end of this particular curly section here. So it'll drop right here. And as you can see, there's no code here, which will make it drop to the next curly deal, which is part of the for loop, which means it'll go to the next row. So we're doing this one row at a time until we hit the maximum, the last row in the spreadsheet that we have. And then it's just going to continue doing this work. And then when it gets done with all the rows, it's going to drop down here, which again has no code, but it's the end of the function. It simply will exit. So that's kind of explanation of what these things do one line at a time. And it, as you can see, it works pretty well. We can go ahead right now and look at the email. And the email doesn't show any new triggers since 15 minutes ago. So I'm going to go ahead and just do one more entry for those who showed up late. I'm going to jump into the form. I'm going to submit another response, put in and salvo or something like that. And I'm going to go ahead and hit submit. The entry will be made. And now we're just going to, we won't even look at the spreadsheet. We'll just simply look at the email and we can see that nothing new has been added yet, and nothing is going to happen until we actually run the script. And so we jump back into the script, and as soon as it shows up here on the screen, I'm going to go ahead and click on the run. It says prepare for execution, running it, and it's all done. And now, if everything worked correctly, when we go to check for email, there it is. There's a new email right there. It says manual trigger pulled, and you can see the new entries are and salvo. So it's exactly what we just entered, and you can see the email gets there pretty quickly. So this essentially is a way how you can use, example we showed that I showed you a second ago, allows you to both be able to bypass the problem triggers are currently experiencing with Google, and at the same time you learned how to put content in any particular spreadsheet cell you wish by using just a single line command, essentially specifying the row and column, and also how to send a simple email out by formatting it any way you wish with as much or as little information as you wish, and you can get information directly from the spreadsheet, and so you can execute it. This time I don't think I'm gonna it seems like we're running a little bit out of time here, so I'm not going to talk about how to deploy this, because as you can see, it works well, but it works when I actually run it. And of course, the idea behind this thing is to try to make the whole idea of the trigger is to do things automatically. When somebody submits a form, then it automatically runs. Well, in this case, you have to manually run the actual script to make it work. And of course, that's totally non-productive solution. So the way you do that is you would deploy this particular script as a web app, as they call it, and that way, once it's a web app, then you can actually use one of the services. Like there is a cron service. Now, there are services out there that allow you to run whatever URL you want to run at specified times or every so often. So you can tell it, for example, run this particular script every 30 minutes, or run it every 5 minutes, or run it every minute, or run it every day, whatever you decide to do. And then you just give it your script that's a web app, and it's going to go execute it. So it's going to continue running it. Let's say you set it up to run every 5 minutes. So it'll keep checking every 5 minutes. As you can see, it only takes a few seconds to run. So it'll check, see that there's nothing new, and it'll be done. And then, whenever somebody actually enters some information to your form, then of course, when it runs the next time around automatically, it's going to see it, process it properly, send the email, and be all done. So that's maybe what I'll do is we'll do another hangout at another time where I'll talk about specifically and show an example how to create a script and turn it into a web app so you can actually run it in this environment. And in fact, maybe what we'll do is we'll just use this exact same script here to, we'll have to modify it somewhat, but basically create a web app from it, and then set up this automated run, or the automated running task, I should say, and just deploy it so it runs. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments here in this event, or if you see it on the YouTube, however you want to do it on Google+, any of the approaches, I'll be happy to answer them if I can. And if I can't, I'll find you the answer. And until next time, I think we're done for today. I hope this was useful. And again, Google, don't do this to me again. Thank you. Till next time.